Okay, hi Bob. We are here with Bob Dorf. And Bob, would you introduce yourself for us, please?
Sure. It's a pleasure to be back in Italy, even though it's not as real as usual. I've been there many times. I have spent 45 years building startups, some successful, some disasters. Um, and in the process, met a gentleman named Steve Blank, who invited me 5 years, 6 years ago now, to join him in developing the Startup Owner's Manual, which is a very deep, rich methodology for getting a startup right. And I've spent the last 6 years traveling the world, teaching this, lecturing about it, and doing my favorite thing other than playing with my grandchildren, working with great young startup people to make their businesses better.
Well, again, Bob. Well, my name is Amina Birashid. I'm a journalist here in Italy, and my focus is about innovation, startups, and the new wave of the economy. So, considering we are at the Global Startup Expo, that it's happening for the first time on the internet in a virtual form, my first question for you is an opinion on how you see the global startup ecosystem is evolving so far.
Well, I think first it is spreading sort of like a disease from country to country, from the most advanced technology experts to the, even in some places to high school students and things like that. It's almost in some ways spreading the same way plagues have spread around the world. And that's both good and bad. It's created great opportunities for people to apply their talents and to, in a few rare cases, make a ton of money. Um, but in some ways, the bad part is there are just too many startups, and it makes it crowded, hard to get attention, uh, and difficult for the really good startups to shine through. And so last year I was in 22 countries around the world, including twice two visits to Milano. And I see sort of different levels of sophistication and activity. Uh, and um, and countries working very hard to advance the quality of their startups, the quality of their startup training and education, um, and, and trying to make innovation and entrepreneurship an important driver in their economy, which in most of the world, including the US, the economy is pretty lousy and could use some excitement.
Yeah, well, I'm actually quite agree with you. So my next question here is considering this situation, I mean, this overhype of the startups, the number of startups, for example, and what we should try to do in order to try to make easier for the very good ones to come up. It's a matter of the structure of the ecosystems, it's a matter of the availability of the investors, it's something related to the skills of entrepreneurs. What do you think is the weak ring of the chain, weakest ring of the chain?
Oh, it's a great question. I think that in the chain for the long term, the weakest link is actually an educational challenge, not a startup challenge. And that is the level at which we teach engineering and software development. The kinds of courses that they teach at Stanford and MIT and the very finest universities in Italy are not the same as what is taught in 90% of the universities. 90% of the universities, you get an engineering degree to be a great coder or a great, director of IT or support executive. But great business ideas come from far more disruptive thinking, whether it's design thinking or big data or things that are really only taught in the advanced degree programs of the finest universities in the world. That's, to me, the long-term challenge for having greater quality of startups around the world. The shorter-term challenge is to apply, whether it's in the US, Italy, or Botswana, or any economy in between those, to apply some kind of a screening process for the startups, that they can't get into an incubator, for example, without some meaningful achievement and some meaningful commitment of the entrepreneurs. They can't get government funding without some pre-qualification, some assessment that this is a meaningful, important business idea and a team that's equipped to make it a successful business for the long term. Right now, government programs are handing out money or seats in programs like candy, without regard for the quality of the entrepreneurs, the commitment of the entrepreneurs, or the uniqueness of the idea. And I think that I haven't, even in the US, I haven't seen that change much. In most countries I've seen, there is not a real distinction between a good team and a good idea versus an ordinary team with an ordinary idea when it comes to providing support, financing, incubator seats, or even mentorship.
Yeah, well, I totally agree. I think we are on the same lane wave because, I'm seeing also here in Italy, the presence of the public actions and money, it's quite too strong. And actually, I mean, they probably are good to drive a country, but doing proper business and successful business is something different. So the approach, it's a problem. But this is very interesting because it's driving me to another question, the next question. The startup wave is not changing only the way we create companies, people create companies, but also is having quite an impact on other things like social organizations, and even the way the economy competes around the world. For example, one of the main aspect I'm seeing is once all the research were focusing on comparing countries to see which is the best in doing business. Now, when we talk about startup ecosystems, the tendency is to compare cities and not countries anymore. Is that is this have any specific meaning from your point of view?
I'm not really sure, to be honest. I think in the more advanced countries, countries for startups, there is certainly a city-by-city competition, particularly in like the U.S., where there are no manufacturing or traditional jobs to compete for. But I think there is still, and in fact, this is the week of the year when it sort of comes to a head, Global Entrepreneurship Week, where countries compare themselves to one another, but they use the wrong metrics. They use number of students enrolled in programs, number startups launched, number of active entrepreneurs in our database. The metric that matters is number of companies that have either achieved some level of funding or survived their first year on the planet. Things that are more meaningful indications of startup success. I had lunch last year with the Minister of Education in Turkey, who said, I don't understand. We have certified 14,000 entrepreneurs through our certification program, but we have almost no startups. Now, Turkey is a very troubled country right now. You could understand, sadly, the stresses they're going through with immigrants and, ISIS and all these horrors. But when I took apart his question, the way they were certifying entrepreneurs was in a classroom, not getting people out, getting their hands dirty, actually learning what works and doesn't work in a startup. And I think that's a critical difference. Governments like to measure, sort of units of work, but if you were to measure successful year-old startups, the metrics would not be as impressive to the voters and the taxpayers and so forth.
Yeah, well, makes sense. Well, another thing I completely agree, I have to say. One more and last question. Considering all these, how you think the startup wave can impact on the development countries' economies? They will gonna to take this as a quantum leap in order to accelerate their social and economical developments. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that it is not a magic bullet. That in developing countries, when you're talking about third world countries, the technology education doesn't likely generate enough really high quality engineers and developers to have great ideas. And problem number two, which exists almost everywhere in the world, is where are the mentors who are willing to coach and advise these startups for the good of their country and the startup ecosystem, not for stock options or for equity, but the way Bill Hewlett and David Packard guided Steve Jobs in the 1980s, sitting on a stool in the garage for no compensation whatsoever. One report was Steve Jobs spent 150 hours on that stool learning from two of the earliest mentors how to build a personal computer company. And so I think there's sort of too much of a rush for success and not enough willingness to invest in startups for the long term, and counting on startups as a significant contributor to an emerging nation's economy is a highly risky proposition, because at the end of the day, when you think about what we define as scalable startups, a startup that's trying to get to $100 million in valuation or sales, that's 1 or 2 out of 1,000. It's not 10%
Sure.
or even 5%. It's 1% on the best of days. And so counting on that as an economic engine for a developing country, I think, is a very dangerous game.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's quite interesting. Well, Bob, thank you very much for this interview that will be shown starting tomorrow at the Global Startup Expo. Will be a very great pleasure to chat with you, and talk to you soon, and see you soon, I hope.
I hope so too. It's my pleasure, and I hope there's a wonderful expo, and look forward to meeting you soon.